You've already gone through the drama of the court thing, the news cameras. 4 major news cameras in Portland had spread the word that how evil I was. I'd been accused of elder abuse and stealing, theft of everything that my aunt had, when all I did was do what she'd asked me to do. So I knew I was innocent. A judge with tears in his eyes told me I'm supposed to be impartial here, but I know you're innocent. You know you're innocent. Don't ever forget it. Starting out getting into that first prison area, and that's a whole different world for me. I'd never been in that world before and didn't understand that world. I'm Kathy Jingling, and this is my restoration story. So I want to tell you a little bit about a kid who grew up, who loved Jesus with all her heart, was called to missions at an early age, and turned out to be a school teacher. Gathering skills through education, comes out an educator and teaches for 10 years in the public schools, knowing that God is still going to restore that call of missions on her life. Then heading into missions. 22 years as an Assembly of God World missionary, involved in Latin America, the Caribbean, and I did a few trips into Asia as well. And God showed me ways to use my experiences, even as an educator, for His good in the lives of restoring children in poverty areas around our world, through Christian schools, through outreaches, through children's ministry, through curriculum development. All skills I'd built up till then with God's plan in mind, even though I didn't understand Him at the time. Until it came to a screeching halt with false charges being filed against me because an elderly aunt was dying and asked me to help her with her finances, the sale of her home, other things. And when I followed through, serving her as I would, because Jesus followers serve people, I served her, my last living relative at my mother's family. And as I did that, I was accused of stealing everything she owned, taking all of her money, ruining her life, and I was charged with 35 counts as a felony person. Went before the courts, filmed by 4 major news stations in the Portland area, and the whole thing was plastered all over the internet. So yes, there are still ways you can see the horrible pictures and charges against me. I ended up heading to prison, taking a no contest charge against me, and spending a year and a day in a federal prison. That's where I learned a whole nother culture. Yes, you walk in and you have to figure out who to look at and who not to look at, because even looking at the wrong person at the wrong time can get you beat up. You've got to learn whole different ways that people communicate, different languages, different words to use. But when I arrived, I knew one thing for certain. I didn't want to become a bitter person. You see, I always loved the Joseph story. I remember even as a kid thinking, how unfair, and yet here it was happening to me. And I knew that in the end, His restoration process takes what's meant for evil and can use it for good, but it's a process. I think back to the time when I first was taken to prison. And as I walked into that situation, I remember thinking that night before, I think this is really going to happen. We were allowed to go home for one last night after the court case. We were getting ready to go after we'd talked to lawyers and all kinds of things, getting ready to go into court for the final sentencing. And in that sentencing process, you're brought in handcuffs, unloaded. There were photographers taking tons of pictures. You go in, and the first thing they're going to do is take you to a place after the sentencing where you are stripped in front of several officers. Strip searches are important. They happen all the time. So if it's 2:00 in the morning and you're awakened, ripped out of your bed and told you're going to be strip searched, you are. To realize the shock that there's no privacy. You're not going to sleep in your own bed. You're going to sleep on a steel bunk with a 1-inch mattress on it. And you feel every inch of that steel every night. They don't turn the lights off and it doesn't get quiet. There's no privacy. You have to get up and go to the bathroom. You have to permission. And trust me, if you have to go and it's not time for you to get up and be allowed to use a restroom, you don't. You have no more rights. You have no more choices. You are told what to wear, and it's the same clothes as everybody else. So all of your clothes are taken away. All of your stuff is taken away. You're even issued government-issued underwear. You have everything that you own gone, you have nothing. In that process, you also don't know who to turn to. You don't know who to ask questions of. You don't know where to go. So you learn to keep your mouth shut and follow and learn fast. You're shocked that people are treated rudely and badly. There were times when you spent the night and you had to watch in certain areas. When you're first put in, you don't go to the minimum side, you go to the maximum part of the prison. So you are now spending the night on a bunk in an open room with people accused of murder in the worst degrees. You can't sleep that first night because you don't know if you will wake up, because you have been given threats in a constant basis from the time you walked in and been strip searched until you've been led to a place where you are to stay or sit until the next day when you're told you can move from that spot. And all the way around you, you've got people murmuring and threatening you that you won't make it through the night. And you have to finally lay down and realize that the God who said he will never leave you or forsake you means it. After going through that time in prison and finally came the day for my release, we walked outside and my sisters greeted me with this little figurine. Now that figurine is important to me. Why? Because she's celebrating. You'd say, well, I'd celebrate too if I got out of prison, especially if I had been falsely accused. No, it means more than that to me. It means you start celebrating God's restoration process before it's complete. His restoring abilities come with great love. And sometimes it's hard love. Sometimes it's hard places. But it still leads us to places where we can help lead others. And so what would come next? A church without a pastor. Nearby, still in Eastern Washington, rural country place called Quincy, Washington. And my people know my story, and they're not ashamed of having a felon pastor. Being involved in a community where even the police and fire departments and community leaders, the superintendent of schools know me, know my story, and still marvel that I'm a pastor. Even in a network where they ask me to be a presbyter. And I get to be involved and encourage women involved in ministry throughout the Northwest. That's exciting to me. Why? Because I'm celebrating his restoration process. Yes, the credentials were gradually restored. Yes, but there was still debt, huge debt. Over $100,000 Department of Corrections said I owed for room and board during my stay. And then there was fees like $75,000 from an insurance company for what I stole, which wasn't stolen. All of those things hanging over my head. And what happens? Finally, a piece of property is sold. My cousin passes away. She's with Jesus already celebrating. But property has been sold. And as I look at that, as I see that take place, it paid all the debts. And so I've been excited to work in the community, work with different groups of people, be involved with people that before, maybe as a little girl growing up in church, I wouldn't have spoken to before. But I do now, because I know they're people who need to know the restoration process that Jesus has for them. And to this day, I still work with people that have come in and out of the prison systems or the jail systems, and that's their way of life. And when I talk to them about a God who can bring restoration, they'll say, sure, that's easier for you to say. And I say, it is easier for me to say because he did it for me. I had so many women in prison tell me, I've faced so many charges, I've done so many crimes, there's no way your God can forgive me. And I said, yes, there is. Why? Because he will restore anyone, even if it's the convicted thief on the cross beside him. Restoration is coming from prison to freedom. Restoration is coming from huge debt to being debt-free. Restoration is coming from no ministry to credentials, a place of ministry, and a place of leadership in a network. What is restoration? An ongoing process by a God of love who restores us.